So first and foremost, I want to thank everyone at Nuestras and all the collaborators for putting together this conference, particularly bringing it here to Holyoke. And also, before I move on, I want to acknowledge the fact that, because part of what I will be talking about is the Puerto Rican diaspora here in Holyoke, but I want to acknowledge the fact that right now my island is in bankruptcy. Just yesterday, 180 plus schools closed down. So who suffers from capitalism? Usually young children and mothers. And so I want to bring that up in forefront to my talk, because I think it's really important. So when Eftari asked me to speak about the history of Holyoke and to make sure I incorporated food in it, I was thought, how am I supposed to bring the story of capitalism and profit making to food? But as I reflected on it and continued to think about, I'm usually a storyteller, so what I'm about to tell you is my story. And I thought about who I am. And I thought about, now at my age, the things that I'm dealing with. So obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis. And I figured that has a lot to do with the colonization of my diet. Right? Because in my island, people eat healthy. Right? In Holyoke, we, particularly in the community, the neighborhood that I live in, we had like one bodega. And you don't always get local, fresh, let alone organic. And for me, I'm learning all of this at my right young age of 50. I'm learning to take care of my person, my body, my health. So this is a story of a collective story of a community in Holyoke that came primarily in the 70s, although Puerto Ricans have been in Holyoke as early as the 40s and the 50s. So I just want to make sure I wrote a little bit, some notes. So let's see, I have something, I don't know what I do with the clicker. I'm sorry, I'm a really bad technical person. It's not, I skipped that class. So here's Holyoke. There was a time where Holyoke was happening and booming. The economy was, believe it or not, Holyoke was the 6th richest city in the country at the time. Anybody? So let me ask some questions. I want to know who my audience is. How many of you have been to Holyoke before today? How many of you are from Holyoke? Okay. So what were the major companies in Holyoke that sort of made Holyoke what it was, like the popularity of Holyoke? What were the two industries people learned? Paper. What else? What? Tobacco. Textiles, particularly silk. Okay? So here's High Street. In the 40s and 50s, you see all the, there's a horse carriage there. But this is the corner of Suffolk. Oh wait, they told me I can do this. Oh, there we go. This is the corner of High and Suffolk Street. This is the corner where the city hall is. So it's green, and then the industries came, and this is sort of the built environment of Holyoke, right? You have all these tenements. These apartments were really built for the workers in the mills, right? So they're hundreds of years old. And they weren't built to last very long. You can see that, like, if you look at there's very little green here. People are all sort of clumped up together. But, people work many hours in Holyoke. They would leave like 4 o'clock in the morning, go work. The reason why these are so close to the mills, all of these here are mills around the area, is because people would come home, rest, and then go back for like a third shift. Right? So the work was hard. Usually young children worked in these mills, if you can see. I'm always interested in when I hear people say, oh, Holyoke is poor, and Holyoke has always been a poor city, right, in terms of the workers. Because what you need to understand is that Holyoke was one of the first industrial cities. It was built to separate social classes, right? So when you go to downtown, you can see where poverty is, because it's segregated. So it was built that way. So first, French Canadians, Germans, Polish, and then Irish. Right? And then in the 50s and 60s, and then even mostly in the 70s, the next group of migrating folks were Puerto Rican. Why would that shift anything? What's the difference between Puerto Ricans and all the other immigrating groups that came? What?
They're U.S. citizens.
Exactly. Puerto Ricans, for those who don't know, are U.S. citizens. It's a status that was given to Puerto Ricans on the island as a result of the Jones Act. And mostly because they needed our men to fight in World War II. Right? So when people say Puerto Ricans are immigrants, we're not. We're migrants. We can move from the island to the mainland, and we don't need a visa. We don't need a passport. We're part of the U.S. We're not actually. Let me rephrase that, because I'm going to get a little political here. We're not really part of the U.S. We are colonized by the U.S. Right? One of the reasons why Puerto Rico is in the economic crisis it is today is because we don't have the power to import and export our goods. The U.S. government does, right? So we are a colony. Why would Puerto Ricans come to Holyoke? Oh, I don't know what that is, sorry. I'm gonna leave it here because, why did Puerto Ricans come to Holyoke? Puerto Ricans came to Holyoke, again, in the beginning 50s and 60s, because of the Connecticut River, and in Connecticut, there was a lot of tobacco fields. Puerto Ricans came to do agricultural work, because that is our background. On the island, before it was industrialized by the U.S., people farmed. And so that is our background. So particularly men would come to New England to work in the farms. I remember as a young girl, hearing at like 4 o'clock in the morning, God forsaken time, people in our building yelling, and then you can hear all the footsteps, because the buses would come and pick up the men. And not just men, women also worked in the tobacco fields, but it was primarily men. So what ended up happening was I think you warned me about that. As World War II, the GI Bill had a lot to do with particularly young white men going off to college, and that left a vacancy in a lot of the manufacturing companies. And so as Puerto Rican men, I'm trying to give you the, la movida, how does things go back and forth. As men were here in Holyoke, working in the tobacco fields, they would find out about a position at AMPAD, maybe, right? Or a position at Hamden Papers. Or some of the women would find out about opportunities in factories. I know for certain my mother came to Holyoke to work at one of the factories on Main Street called Echo Dress. So she was a major seamstress, senior seamstress. And so as white men were going off, getting an education, Puerto Rican men were taking those job opportunities that were being vacant. because a lot of the men were not returning back to Holyoke, right? Unless they were part of the power structure. So if they were going off to college and becoming teachers, men, particularly some men, were given, it was almost like a guarantee that they would get a job at a school system, at the police department, at Holyoke Hospital. But those same opportunities didn't happen for Puerto Ricans, right? The other piece that when I asked what distinguishes Puerto Ricans from every other immigrating group is the color of our skin, right? And although Puerto Ricans we are mixed race, we have some of us that are light, you have some of us that have Taino Indian, and you have some who are a little darker who have, that we have African roots in us too. So we're a very mixed race. But what separated us from all the other immigrating groups was the fact that we were brown, right? That's a reality. We can't take that away from the equation. So when Puerto Ricans came here, even though there were minimal jobs and we were taking them, guess what? Those factories that employed thousands of people at the time were leaving, right? First to the south for cheaper labor and then overseas. So when you hear like old Holyokers that talk about, oh, back when Holyoke was great and the Puerto Ricans messed it up, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't really all that great to begin with, to start with, right? Even though we had millionaires, we had also the most millionaires in the country per capita, there were still a lot of poor people in Holyoke. Mostly white, mostly workers. So it wasn't all that great, but we live in this romanticized version of what Holyoke used to be. So why would Puerto Ricans come to Holyoke? One, for work. As someone who grew up in the Holyoke public school systems, the narrative was always that we came to Holyoke to get subsidized housing and welfare. That was always the narrative. And as an adult, I've done a lot of my research because I really believe in the power of history and knowing your knowledge. And I remember going to the Wisteria Hearst Museum, Carlos Vega Archives, and picking up a file. And in that file, there was a newspaper clipping that said, Latinos run to City Hall to demand jobs. And at that moment, all the stories that I had heard from my family, and not from the school system, became a reality. Right? I was like, wait, we did come here to work. We didn't come here to get welfare. Yes, that happened to some folks, some families, because if they couldn't find work, there was no work here. Or there was little work here. I shouldn't say no work. There was little work here. So, so one is for work. Two is because there's a sense of community. When you're around your people, there's a sense of community. Puerto Ricans are very family-oriented. I can't tell you how many nephews and nieces, adopted nephews and nieces I have. I mean, and we did not see each other for a long time, and they say, bendición, titi. Because that's just how we are. And so, you know, for family, and because you could go to services and you find people who speak Spanish, right? My mom used to always, this is a funny story. My mom used to always use me as a translator, and I'd go to the doctor with her. And she'd say, tell the doctor this and this and that. And I go, this and this and that, and also. She's like, that's not what I told you to tell him. Well, how do you know? You say you don't know English. So she knew English. She just was afraid of speaking it. It wasn't her dominant language. And my mom was a very passionate person, so when she said something, she said it with a lot of passion. And she wanted to make sure that I said it with a lot of passion. So wherever you went, you could go, and you found, you know, services in Spanish. So that's why people would come here. This is a really interesting picture that I found at Wisteria Hearst Museum. This was one of the things that Puerto Ricans encountered when they came to Holyoke And then, again, as I've done my research, it seemed like fires has always been a thing in Holyoke. But particularly in the 70s and 80s, there was a string of fires that shook our community to the core. And one of them was a woman, a mother, and her 3 daughters dying in a fire. And as a 13-year-old, you can imagine the impact that had on my life. To literally watch someone on the window holding on to dear life as her children are in the closet dying. As a result of that happened on a Friday. The community mobilized, and this picture really brings together that moment. And if you can see, there's a makeshift casket right here with a Puerto Rican flag. And again, this is one of those moments where I'd always heard my mom be like, oh, we organized and da-da-da, and the professionals came and took all the credit, and we did all the work, and everything. Mom, please stop hating. Like, just stop, it's okay, I get it, you work. And then I came across this picture, and I hadn't even noticed it until I took it home and opened up the DVD that I copied it on. But right here, that's my mother. And right there's my brother. And of course, that's nosy me. Just wanted to make sure who was in the crowd. Let's see who's here. Maybe I see. And a lot of these faces I know. I grew up with her. That's Evelyn. These guys. This is a set of twins. Edwin. So I knew. I touched something that I shouldn't have. I don't even know how to get back. So I'm not even gonna try. What happens? You give these cool little things to people who aren't tech savvy. But anyways, so that's sort of what so the Puerto Rican community here was very resilient, right? Very resilient, and that's a rich history that we have to know. As a result of that, Nueva Esperanza was, born. Nueva Esperanza was a housing organization, and Nueva Esperanza birthed a lot of programs. It was the only nonprofit in Holyoke that dealt with Latino issues. And I do want to give a little bit of I keep mentioning Puerto Ricans because that's the majority. Currently, even today, 75% of our kids in our public schools are Puerto Rican. I would actually argue it's more, but they'll keep the numbers at 75. But we also have other Latinos here. So there is a small community of Colombians. There's an increasing Dominican community. And so our African American communities has always been very small, 2%. As a result of the housing crisis in Boston, many African American families have been brought to Holyoke because in Boston they did away with shelters. So here, people are being displaced and uprooted from their community to Holyoke. I want to bring it back to, so Nueva Esperanza, and in fact, today, Nuestras Raíces was birthed originally from Nueva Esperanza. And I'm very proud to be able to be here today, to think about the work that Nuestras is doing. I was always a friend, but never a fan of Nuestras because I was a city girl. Right? I didn't know what it meant to be like organic this and organic that. And I certainly didn't understand my cultural roots. So I didn't know what a batata from malanga or I didn't know what any of it. I ate it, but I didn't know none of it meant. So Nuestras Raíces has been able to provide opportunities for our families, and particularly, again, those who sort of have that agricultural background to have their gardens and their farms, right? And that's an important piece of our community. As a result, our farmers are able to sell their crops, and the community benefits from them, right, in our farmers markets. So for me, one of the most important things about today's conference, and that I want to leave you all is that, I said this to somebody else earlier this morning. What's interesting to me is that those of us who come from the land and that were removed from the land now are finding our way back to the land, right, with our roots. And I'm going to say something that's going to be a little controversial. I mean it out of love and respect. But our food justice movement here in the Pioneer Valley is predominantly white. And we have to figure out a way to bridge these cultures, right? Because the reality is that communities of color for years have been organizing and have been taking care of themselves. And all of a sudden, we professionalized organizing, right? I didn't even realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that you could go to UMass and graduate with a degree in organizing. That's a thing. It wasn't a thing for me, it was in my blood. I saw my mom, when she knew families were coming from Puerto Rico, I saw her going to her neighbors, collecting mittens and jackets and just taking care of it. My mom would cook these big cacerolas, that's these big pots of rice and beans. We were 3 people living in the house. I'd be like, Mommy, why are you cooking so much food? She's like, because there's always a neighbor that needs something. So for me, organizing isn't a degree. It's what I live every day. It's who I am in the womb of my mother. It's who I think for people of color, we recognize that this isn't just a new movement. It's a movement we've been involved in for years, for decades. It's what we do. And so I also want to acknowledge the fact that even where you are today, at some point, this belonged to an indigenous group. And so we have to, for me, I will ask white allies, because if you're all here, you're an ally, to really examine your positionality in this movement and figure out when you take a step up and when you take a step back. And what we need in our communities is for, as people of color, is to be acknowledged for the history and the knowledge that we have, that it's organic. We may not have gone to a college and get a degree, but we have this knowledge. It's in our blood. It's organic. And so we need to really appreciate that. For you youngins, I'm going to tell you this. When you come, and I'm talking to all the youngins, when you come, you have to recognize that there was a movement a long time ago. Like I said, I work at Hampshire College, but I also work with a lot of the 5 colleges. And it's always interesting to me when I hear a young, enthusiastic, idealistic student say, oh, we should do blah, 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 blah. Yeah, you should actually go back. In fact, in preparation for this, I ended up going to our office and looking up all the Div 3s that Hampshire College students did on Nuestras Raíces. Like literally there's a box of them, right? So trust me, you're not the first to think about that. I appreciate your energy, but know your history, know the timeline and the organizations that you're working in. There's a history there, and where's your moment in history? And what's the legacy that you want to leave? Is it a legacy of colonization? Or is it a legacy where you will allow people of color to take their place. Because don't forget, it was our place to begin with. Thank you.